This isn't the end of the world. We'll be live now. So.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, if you could take your seats again. We're going to get started with the second part of our program. So before we bring up our special guests, you already saw how Hollywood viewed the Apollo 13 mission. Now we're going to see a short video about what really happened. So let's run that video.
It was Monday night, April 13th, 1970.
Thank you for that sincere applause.
At the moment Dick Cavett took to the air, Jack Swigert, Fred Hayes, and Jim Lovell were headed for space. But nobody was watching, partly because this was the third flight to the moon.
And partly because a lot of people thought that the spacecraft was a summer rerun. And
Apollo 13 was also on the air that night.
13 Houston, we got a groovy TV picture.
Not a single network carried the broadcast. Even the commander said it was routine.
Very routine. Everything was just sort of quiet.
oh, Paul McCartney has left the Beatles.
But at 11:37 p.m., the flight that had captured no one's attention
Here is a special report on Apollo 13.
captured everyone's.
The Apollo 13 spacecraft has suffered a major electrical failure, leaving the astronauts in no immediate danger of ruling out any chance of any lunar landing as of now.
Something on board had gone terribly wrong.
Okay, yeah, definitely not a problem here. Here's the thing, is please. Oh, here's the problem.
The crew reported a loud bang and a shudder.
The command module was dying.
Okay, stand by there, Dave, we're looking at it.
They were losing power. Their main engine was probably dead. They didn't know why. Then Lovell looked out the window of the spacecraft and saw their oxygen leaking into space. They were 200,000 miles from Earth. They were living in Odyssey, a car-sized command module attached to a lunar lander, Aquarius. One of two oxygen tanks had simply disappeared. The other was leaking fast. 2 of 3 fuel cells were dead. The last was fading.
The emergency has ruled out any chance of a lunar landing and could endanger the lives of the astronauts themselves.
That's because at this point they had no way to get home. See, without fuel cells, their main engine was useless. So they faced the horrifying possibility of becoming a permanent satellite, a dead spacecraft carrying 3 dead astronauts orbiting the Earth and the Moon to this day.
Okay, now let's everybody keep cool. We got Lynn still attached. The Lynn spacecraft's good, so if we need to get back home, we got Lynn to do a good portion of it. Lynn?
The LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module, was only supposed to take them to the moon. Now it would have to get them home.
And astronauts Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert are making their way through the tunnels of the lunar module, using it as a lifeboat.
Now they had to conserve every molecule, power, and oxygen.
Also, as Jim Lovell has once put it to me, I can breathe very slowly. And they will if they have to.
It was now early Tuesday morning. At their current speed, they wouldn't make it home until sometime Friday night. But the LEM was only equipped to last through Wednesday. They had to get home fast, but they only had one big engine left. The lunar module engine, designed to work on the moon, never intended a rocket burn a spacecraft all the way back home. But they didn't have a choice. On their present trajectory, they would miss the Earth by 40,000 miles.
That burn had to work. We had to get back on that trajectory.
Then why don't you go for the burn?
This is very well the tensest moment of his flight. We should know within a minute or two if the burn was successful.
But something that never happened before
40%.
happened now.
Okay, Maurice, you're looking good.
The burn wasn't good. It was perfect.
This has been a very close call, and we're not out of the woods yet, not by a long shot.
Their power and water might not last, and within hours they would suffocate on their own carbon dioxide.
If I may be serious for one moment and ask the entire audience for a moment of prayer for the crewmen of the Apollo 13.
Your astronauts will come back safe.
There was plenty to pray for. Still days from home, the astronauts realized they were killing themselves. The lunar module's filters, which sucked away their poisonous carbon dioxide, weren't designed to last this long.
So you might say that on a $20 billion program, without tape, plastic, and cardboard, you lost.
The crew used spacecraft scrap to build this filter, saving a $1 billion mission with a buck's worth of cardboard box, duct tape, and crystals. They also saved their lives.
Okay, stand by.
When they jettisoned the damaged part of their spacecraft,
And then put all side of that system.
they saw what had killed the mission,
Is that right?
and what nearly killed them.
The whole panel was blown out, almost from the base to the victim.
An oxygen tank had exploded, creating a huge hole and a new problem. If the heat shields were damaged, the astronauts would never survive the fiery re-entry into Earth's atmosphere.
Apollo 13 should have entered the Earth's atmosphere at this time.
There are 4 minutes of every re-entry when communication is lost. For the thousands waiting, this 4 minutes was an eternity.
Less than 10 seconds now, we will attempt to contact Apollo 13.
No one would know if they'd survived the plunge into Earth's atmosphere until they re-established communication.
Odyssey Houston standing by, over. Okay, we reached Jet. Odyssey Houston, we show you at the main, because it really looks great.
It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen.
All right, so we're going to introduce each of our special guests. Please join me in welcoming First Flight Director Milt Windler. Milt served as one of the 4 flight directors on Apollo 13. He began his career at NASA in 1959 on Project Mercury. He served as flight director on Apollos 8, 10, 11, 13, 14, and 15, and all 3 Skylab missions. Milt Windler. Next up, Flight Director Gary Griffin joined NASA in 1964 during Project Gemini. He served as flight director for all the Apollo missions and later served as the director of the Johnson Space Center, succeeding Christopher Kraft in 1982. Gary Griffin. Next up, Gene Grant served as the leader of the Tiger team of flight directors who brought the Apollo 13 mission safely back to Earth. He joined NASA in 1960 on Project Mercury and later assumed all flight director duties for all Gemini missions. He coined the famous phrase, failure is not an option. Please welcome Gene Grant. And now, Apollo 13 astronaut Fred Hayes. He was selected to be astronaut in 1966. He served as a backup crew member for Apollo 8, 11, 16. On the Apollo 13 mission, Fred spent over 142 hours in space. He left NASA in 1979 to join Grumman and stayed until 1992. Please welcome a great friend of the Cradle, Fred Hayes. Now, Jim Roberts could not be with us tonight, but we were able to get a tape message from him, which we'll show now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I can't be there tonight to help celebrate the Apollo 13 anniversary. And by the way, I guess you noticed that there's a roll of duct tape on each table. Ladies and gentlemen, you might really know what the significance of the duct tape is to Apollo 13. It turned out that in the filters of the filtering the oxygen, of the air, I should say, going through the system, that the container, the filter, had been completely used up. and it was not removing any more carbon dioxide in the circulation of the air. And so consequently, we had to take one of the fillers from the command module and jury-rig it to the system in the lunar module. And we did that with essentially duct tape. And that's exactly how we were able to keep the system with air and remove the carbon dioxide so we can keep breathing all the way down. So duct tape has a big significance to the success of Apollo 13. Duct tape, don't leave home without celebration that the Grumman people had really made possible by bringing the lunar module in place and getting us full. I understand that Jerry and Gene and Fred and Bill are there. I'm sorry I can't join them, but I just want to say to the audience that they're in good hands, and I understand that Jerry will take over and start the program.
If you would look underneath your bread and butter plate, if you have a penny taped to it, you've won that piece of duct tape that's on the center of the table. So a good little says, duct tape buttons will have another. And now I'm going to turn over this great conversation to Jerry Griffin.
Thank you, Andrew. He's got it. Okay. What we're going to do is, I got this job. All of you that know Carol Dawson, she's very sneaky sometimes. She can get you to do things. She contacted me 4 times about this event. First time, just see could I do it? Yeah. Second time, we got some dates. Any of those fit? I told the dates that fit. Third time, she told me, well, it'll be the night I told her, well. And the last time she contacted me, she said, would you be kind of the moderator or host or something? I said, okay. Yeah. So thank you, Carol, for putting me in this position. I'm glad to do it. We're just going to have a conversation. We have been together so long that we can almost finish each other's sentences. It's kind of weird. We've heard our stories. We won't try to keep away from the real technical stuff. It's easy to get off into the mud pretty fast. And I thought we'd start with me. I'm going to set the stage for Apollo 13. I think by the time we were into getting ready for 13, we had already been out to the moon 4 times. We've been there on 8, and we've been there on 10, and then we did 11 and 12. 11, we proved we could land. 12, we landed on a Flint Point. Landed next to a Surveyor spacecraft that had been sent out 3 years earlier, and got pieces on it. So we were getting to the point where I think the crew and the mission control people, the whole engineering organization, we were in cadence. We were kind of in the lunar cadence. It's different than Earth orbit, and we were feeling more comfortable with the hardware and what we had to do. We were by no means slacking off. I mean, we knew we were still facing tough stuff. But 13, Mel handled the launch from the Cape. I had a little wrinkle. We might get into that a little bit. Every flight had trouble. They were going minor to what 13 got to later. But it was a mission that was aimed at a place called Balmoral on the moon. It was a very rugged area and great. The lunar scientists were just licking their chops to land there and let Jim and Fred get out and walk all over it, collect lots of samples. So that was kind of the setup. Things were going well, smooth, and I would like to get Gene to talk a little bit about the training that I think was the key to success of Apollo. I think the training of the crew and the training that we did in Mission Control, so many simulations and so much repetitive failures thrown at us by our sunguys. But talk about that a little bit, about how you think we were prepared for Apollo.
I think the real key is the way we train. The controllers are good. Superb engineers. We develop a plan. It seems we spend an entire life writing the mission rules, how we're going to handle all the what-ifs for the mission. And it finally gets down to about 3 months out. We start the training process. And it starts off with launch aborts. Flight directors can handle that thing, the team is real time critical. The next thing is you start doing some of the translunar stuff. And then you go into the landing. But the key thing is our training team is watching every one of us. And they're trying to address, is there any weaknesses in this team? And in the 20th anniversary of the Apollo 13 mission, one of the controllers, Arnie Aldrich, basically almost gave an ode to the simulation team. Looking at after the mission, he says there's no way we could have handled this mission. Everything failed. But the thing is, this team had it had a unique chemistry that allowed them to do the near impossible. And I think that was the key to every mission we'd ever flown in mission control. There was a chemistry in the controllers that no matter whatever happened, we will address the problems. We'll never lose a crew in space. We'll bring them all back home. So I think it was the chemistry. Failure is not an option, is what really is they talk about. But basically, the teams had a much deeper perspective, responsibility for that mission. Close with one final thing. I worked in flight test, and my flight test boss, Harry Carroll, flew in Italy and over Europe. And he said, Gene, in the business you're in, you treat every mission as if it was the first mission. And that is the kind of intensity you need to survive. Launch a crew and bring them back home.
You know, Fred Hayes was probably spent more time in Bethpage than any other person in NASA during those years. And boy, were we lucky to have him on Apollo 13, because we had a lunar module that had to work, and it worked well. I've always had the feeling that people locked on to the command and service module because they saw that sitting even on the Saturn at the launch pad. They could see that shiny service module and all that. But the lunar module really proved to be a lifesaver in 13. And we had flown it. We flew it on 9, joined with the CSM. We flew it on 10, 11, 12. So we had experience with these two vehicles together. Brent, did those experiences where we had flown in Earth orbit with the with the descent engine, did that help in your mind to figure out how we use it?
Well, I think the mission had actually kind of looked at all the odds and ends in the certification of the lunar module was Apollo 9. in North because they did about everything. They did staging. They did I think a manual burn. In a similar way of having to control the vehicle that we ended up doing when we lost the computer. So Apollo 9 was a very, very thorough checkout of the lunar module that gave us a lot of confidence, I think, from there. Let me digress a little bit about, there's a lot of friends I know from my 17 years with Grumman, and the little over a year I spent here at the Bethpage testing, getting limbs ready to go to Kennedy to fly. Let me just pay my respect for the intensity and sacrifice so many people made in those times. In 1967, when I was at Grumman, almost continuously, we did test operations 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And that year, we lost one shift. It snowed bad enough, one shift couldn't get into work. Otherwise, the only day we shut down was Christmas Day. So that was the intensity and trying to meet the schedules that was going on at that time here at Grumman. And of course, that was, you could go to other places and program to meet the schedule. That was the kind of worker intensity and schedule pressure that was undergoing. The LEM was a very unique vehicle, so there's a lot of new firsts to figure out how to operate this thing that operate only at 5 psi, cabin pressure or vacuum, and operate only in space. No, not much aerodynamics. I mean, you could tell that by looking at it. It was a pretty ugly looking thing if you were a fighter pilot like I was. But other than that, I think the confidence is from the missions before. All had problems, not just Apollo 13. In fact, I once, after I actually left the program, looked at the very thick total Apollo program report. And there's an appendices, and they have a number of appendices in that book, and one of them covers anomalies, or we call them sometimes funnies, but they're things that go wrong, and they listed them by missions. And if you exclude Apollo 7 and Apollo 8, which only had one spacecraft, to give you trouble. If you look at all the others with both vehicles, Apollo 13 had the second least anomalies of all the flights in the program. Now, we didn't get to use our command module too much, so maybe that was why, but we had the second least. So that was the nature of our business. Just to speak to Gene's thing on mission control, we were enjoined in a very unique way in training that made us tied into that team and gave us a lot of confidence that things were going to get worked out. And it was always, I knew in my mind what I'd seen, having been involved in those training through Apollo 8 and then 11. I knew and found out later many people on the ground got less sleep than I got in flight because I knew they'd be going into the earth to figure things out. So I had great confidence in that team.
You know, the visibility that people saw in those years for the astronauts and mission control, because during the mission and landing and taking off and all that, they showed mission control and they showed pictures of the spacecraft and so on. But we were, mission control and the astronauts were just tip of the iceberg. We had a tremendous base below us that was comprised of the other centers that helped us. Every contractor that produced hardware and software helped us. So it wasn't just those of us in that room that you saw and the crew that worked all these things out. We had engineers from all country. And it was a real teamwork. And to me, that's the other secret of the success of Apollo, was the teamwork. There was a period in there, I was telling Stuart and Leonard, that for a period where a person will throw out an I, was seldom heard. It was always we. I called it kind of the era of we. And it was amazing. If they did a maneuver, I would go to a post-ship press conference and say we did a maneuver, and as if I had anything to do with riding the engine. So it was a unique, very unique time, very single-minded purpose that helped. Now, Mel came from that great state of Virginia, still has that soft Virginia accent. And he had the launch of Apollo 13 from the cave, which had the only time we had an anomaly with Saturn V in launch. Yeah, I bet you remember it well. Well, so talk about that one.
Well, before I do, though, I'm afraid I'm going to get some things here. One is, Jerry said we're not going to talk about details of what happened, and he said that because we didn't get so old, we don't remember all of it.
We remember it all, we just tell a different story every time.
And Gene used to kind of downplay himself a little bit because as the leader of the flight control gang, he used to always say that the most important mission is the one you got right now. And so we treat it with that kind of approach. And I think that's why we tried to do as much on Apollo 13 as we could, no matter that we, how many did you say we had already flown? 6 to the moon. So anyway, but you asked me about the launch, and we were very accustomed during the simulation of the launch stages to losing engines. And that was kind of a standard thing, and you lost an engine, and you pressed on. And that's exactly what happened in Apollo 13. One engine shut down somewhat quicker, too soon. And, but it was a middle engine, so we didn't have a lot of offset for us. And we still had to propel it because we hadn't burned it. All we did was we burned it later in the flight than we planned to do. So we really weren't too concerned about that. We should have been because the engine was about to blow up. And but it didn't. And so that's this is as good a model, I guess you could say. But it was cycling and it was a bad thing for getting ready to happen. But they didn't because the system shut itself down and we pressed on. And it turned out to be really just a little bump in the road, especially compared to what happened later on.
You know, I was listening, of course I was in the control center, but you guys handled it so smoothly. It was bang bang, Jim Muffle, and I was sitting an engine on the second stage, and he went bang bang, and you went bang bang, and it just very, very smooth. But it was a major anomaly that could have shut the flight down right there.
Well, it was a major problem in the engine, but it wasn't to the operations people. It turned out. It's kind of like your Apollo 12 when the Lightning hit the spacecraft. Things went crazy for a while. And John Aaron said, well, throw this switch up here. And we did, and everything came back to normal because it had been normal all the time. We just didn't know what was going on. And that was Gene's problem there on the long when the crew said we got a problem. Why? All the lights and indicators got flashing, and you didn't know which one were instrument protection problems and which one were true problems. And Fred, I think you said that our mission was had the fewest anomalies. I really didn't know that. except if one big anomaly was all it took.
The oxygen tank exploded.
There's anomalies and then there's anomalies.
You know, that's a pretty good place to kind of back up for a second, because some people may not know or remember. I do remember that. Say the moon is roughly 250,000 miles away. We were on our way to the moon. We were about 200,000 miles from home and 50,000 miles to go, rough figures. We were still docked, had this command service module, and we had a lunar module all together. And when there's a long story of what caused the tank to explode, but it exploded when they tried to turn on the fans to stir up the cryogenic. It's liquid, but in 0G it gets all globs. And so the fan was to make it homogeneous again. You know, stir it all up, make it homogeneous. And supposedly that was, it helped engage it. Turned out, that's what we did. And later flights, we just took the fans out of the tank and didn't do that anymore. But they also redesigned the inside of the tank. So they turned on who did that? Probably Jack? Probably.
I was cleaning up from a TV show.
Yeah, so we told Jack we need to stir the cryos, is the term we used. And when he stirred them, the tank exploded. And we didn't know what it was. It was just a loud bang used in a problem. Now, the point I want to make here is that if that accident had occurred, it probably occurred at about the best place it could, if it was going to happen. Because if we had been in lunar orbit, the lunar module had left to go land and landed, and then we started the tanks in the command and service module, and it blew up, it would not have been a good day. There was no recovery from that moment. So it was a bit of serendipity that tank exploded where it did. Gene, you were on duty when all this was happening. This is a time where I think maybe a little bit of a timeline of what you guys went through with the crew would be interesting to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are many challenges in every mission we've done. 13, I think, was maybe one of the fortuitous challenges because we had all the right people in the mission control business. We had the smartest trajectory guy and Glenn Lunny down there. Literally, when the problem occurred, literally within about 5 minutes, he had been listening in and he was down in the trench. The trajectory team started to put together. The other thing was that Jerry and I, the overall fighter pilot, there's something about a fighter pilot mentality that says, we're tough and confident. We will take this problem you've given us, shoot over, and we're going to come out the other end very successful. You know, if you really want to find out what happened in Apollo 13, however, you got to go to the debriefing parties down at the Hub Garden in Dickinson, Texas, because that is where all the faults in the mission show up. And there it's interesting to get crew. This is very private. No civilians there. But it's just the crew and the controllers. And if you want to know what a band of brothers is all about, it's too bad we never recorded any of those sessions we had down there.
That wasn't too bad. That was a good thing.
You know, it was funny. The astronauts had a show because we'd always get into Indian arm wrestling late in the debriefing down at Front Garden. And the astronauts never wanted to take on any of the controllers in Indian arm wrestling. And always sent Jack Schmidt to arm wrestle with us. And we're fortunate we always had a doctor there that could take care of anything that happened during the course. But this was the kind of people we had. They were true rough and tough Americans. that saddled up to do a job, and when they went to execute that job, get out of their way, they would make things happen. And in Apollo 13, they brought the crew of Apollo 13 home.
Fred, there was I worked on the movie Apollo 13 as a technical advisor, and which was an interesting time in my life. But it was an interesting thing that the movie people kept asking, weren't you scared? And kept asking those of us, Bubba was there when Ron Howard asked that question several times. And we said, no, that's not the right term. They said, well, you were at least nervous, weren't you? No, that's not the right term either. We were turned on. We were turned on to solve this thing. Now this guy with pen and paper, and I guess maybe a calculator or something, I don't know, started tracking consumables, because that was one of the big things we were worried about. Did we have enough O2, water, power, you name it, lithium hydroxide canisters that Jim talked about? Did we have enough to get home soon? So he was tracking these things on his own, and I'm not quite sure how you did that so accurately, because when he got home, his calculations matched those of 1,000 of us on the ground that were calculating the same thing. And you could lay the curves on top of each other. It turned out that water was our shortest consumable. And I thought at first it was going to be oxygen. It wasn't. Talk about the consumables and how we kind of played that game to make sure that Joe.
I didn't really track consumables. Jim Lovell, right after we got the first burn done that got us on the path to get around the moon, asked me to look at consumables. So it was a one-shot thing, and of course at that time the planned entry was at $150-something, not 146. And so I used that figure, and I used a burn card. We called it, just ripped out a card out of the checklist that normally you write down the next procedure Mission Control would pass, which gave you the 3 attitudes, the TIG, time of ignition, burn time, delta V, that kind of stuff. And it had a blank area at the bottom half of that card. That's why I used that card. And just by grocery store arithmetic, I just started cranking the numbers. I assumed a power down of 18 amps. And in a normal lamb operations on powered descent, for instance, with everything running to go land, the vehicle would be at about a little over 60-something amps. And in coasting flight, with everything running, normally would be about 35. Now, I didn't do actually as good. Jared's giving me more credit. The people on the ground figured out a way to get us down to about 12.5, ultimately. But with that power level, even at 18, that barely made it, even on that longer return time. The water ran out. Water for cooling primarily, but I knew it. I had a curve on board from Apollo 11 that I could look at, again, amperage versus water consumption through the water sublimator. And we ran out of water about 5 hours before entry. So I was more worried about water for cooling. Apollo 11, as sort of an engineering test, we had them turn off the water valve. So we watched that LEM 5, die in orbit, in lunar orbit. Watched the components that died. And the first major component of a system, I think, died at about 8 hours from that data. So I figured, well, we're going to run out at 5 hours, so I still got 3 hours pad underwater. The oxygen I never calculated. We had more oxygen than we needed. I mean, we had the full tanks and an ascent decent stage of LEM. We had 2 full backpacks. Stacked on top of the backpacks was the OPS, which is an emergency bottle in case you got a half-inch hole in your suit. That would give you 15 minutes to get back in the LEM. That was 6,000 PSI pressurized thing that basically I knew was about 1 day oxygen supply that we could feed through a purge valve in our suit to replenish oxygen. So I never bothered calculating that. I use that incidentally, take a picture of when I talk to children, particularly elementary children, because I can show them all that hand scratching of arithmetic by hand, and I can say, this is why arithmetic is important.
I think you ought to tell them, we ought to talk a little bit about why we keep talking about the water. The electronics all generate a bunch of heat, and if you don't keep the heat down, then you're in trouble because they burn up because they get too hot. And that's the problem he was talking about. I guess everybody understood that, but you wouldn't think water was that important, but it was.
You know, one of the things that we had to do in Apollo 13 that had never been done before or since, and that was to power down a spacecraft all the way. We had to save the command module to make sure that we had an entry beam. And so it had no fuel cells, the O2 was gone, so we had to turn it off. All it had left was some small re-entry batteries that would get you from the orbit or at the top, kind of the top of the atmosphere down to the water. So we had to turn it completely off. And then we had to figure out how to start it, because that had never been done. Spacecraft, I suspect, like the lunar module here at Bethpage and out in Downey with North American Rockwell, where they were built. When they were shipped, they actually had some power on them, and they never came on. That was low power during shipping. But then when they got to the Cape, they started it with what we call ground support equipment, all kinds of umbilicals of power, water, whatever it took to power up the spacecraft all the way. And that's one of the last things that kind of gets disconnected before you launch. The point in all that is, then we had to figure out how to start this thing with some very little power. So every time it threw a breaker or something, that it didn't blow everything off and off a bunch of other circuitry. We actually took Gene's crew off. It was your guys that figured out how to restart, and Ken Mattingly was in the simulator constantly, and they would try things, they wouldn't work, they'd have to try again, try again, try again. So I think that was a real lesson in what can be done when Gene talks about the team trying to figure out what it was going to take to get it back. So we don't have Jack Swigert here to talk to us, but Jack was probably the equivalent of Fred in the command module. He had been so much time out in Downey. He had actually been at the center of creating the malfunction procedures, emergency procedures. So he knew the command module inside and out. And what, to great, again, serendipity, we had this really good command module guy and this really good lunar module guy that got us home. Gene wants to say something.
Yeah, one of the things that all the flight directors really came to appreciate is that we were the young pups. We were generally in our early 30s to a great extent. And the thing that was amazing, all of our bosses, they weren't micromanagers. Today you hear about micromanaging organizations right along the line. Basically, they turned us loose. They knew we had the job. We accepted the accountability for that job. And Jerry says, I say, Bill says, they came to us and said, how can we help you? And that was the relationship that existed, I think, between the working level devils and basically the top management we had, was one that also made this program work. We were smart, but we had leadership that trusted the people to execute.
Bill, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to vote John. There's a lot of people that came and did stuff, unknown numbers. But I was going to mention John Aaron because I always thought he was a guy that could work with the systems people about powering down. He talked, I think, Fred mentioned getting the power down to 12 amps or something like that. And, but everybody that has a subsystem, their natural reaction is, I gotta have mine, I can't turn mine off. And then when you ask them, well, what happens if you do? And they look at you with a blank look and say, well, nothing. And John Aaron was very good at talking people into being realistic about their power requirements and what really had to be turned on and turned off. I always thought he did get a lot of recognition from the working people especially. There were many more. If you look at the Apollo 13 movie, one of the things they did to make it dramatic was they talked about the carbon dioxide going up and how we didn't have enough lithium hydroxide to scrub that out, which we did. And so the guy that was in charge of that subsystem knew that was going to happen. I mean, there was no great dramatic revelation to it like they played it in the movie. But he got busy and got to making a jury rig deal that allowed us to use the lunar module, the command module canisters in the lunar module. So things like that happened all over the place.
I've always thought there was an interesting tie between Apollo 13 and Apollo 14. Turned out, as I said earlier, we were headed for a place called Palmyra that we didn't make on Apollo 13, but we did on 14. It was a good landing. It's Al Shepard's plane. And Brad, tell a story about how you asked to be on the, that's all I'm going to cue you. There's this guy had trained to be at Palmyra. So pick it up from there. Tell me that not too long.
Yeah, after 13, after about a month, I got another job assignment. He called me in and told me I was going to be the backup commander on 16. And the way the schedules had slipped out, it was going to be quite a long time before we really got into serious training. So I talked to John Young, who was the commander of the prime crew, and said, John, do you mind if I'm missing a little bit of the front end here? I'd like to volunteer to be a Capcom on 14. And I wanted to be on Jerry's team because I knew Jerry would cover the second EVA when they would do the field geology exercise, climbing up the slope of Cone Crater to in the Palmyra region there to do the sampling, which I had trained quite a bit of time for, and I thought I might be of some help. So anyway, I volunteered and was a Capcom for Jerry on the Apollo 14 mission with that thought. It turned out I didn't help that much directly. In fact, they got mad at me at the end when I had to call off their EVA because they had not reached the very edge of Cone Crater, and they had struggled. It was actually a lot heavier workload than we thought it would be, and it turned out to be trying to climb up that slope in a pressurized suit. And so they were getting winded as well, and I had to ask them several times to get back to the limb. And so they were a little upset with me about that, and Jerry.
Yeah, they didn't like that. But anyway, it's an interesting time, and another piece of teamwork that came out. And Fred missed the front end of 16, backing up 16 to work on 14 at his request. So we're probably getting toward the end of this, and I was told 9:30 was a good target, and I think we've run out of airspeed 9 is.
I got one more thing just for benefit of Jack Schweiger, who over the years has not gotten that much attention. The one thing that was mentioned earlier was the power up of the command module. You realize that it was a vehicle that was never supposed to be powered down, so there was no procedure. It had to be invented with a lot of simulation time, checking it out, and it was a very lengthy procedure. When they read it up, Jack Schweiger copied it. He and I were going to power up the command module. Jack obviously leading. Jim would stay in the limb that had flight control, communication, etc. And the procedure got done and finally written by Jack on tearing off the backs of books. We had no blank paper. Believe it or not, we had no blank paper on board. So he ripped backs off checklists, books, and things, and that's how he wrote down the procedure. Very lengthy. I think the press called it the read-up of War and Peace. But he carefully numbered the pages, and we got that 17 hours before entry. I looked it up. 17 hours before we're going to hit the air, we're with this dead spacecraft. So Jack and I read through it and kind of got the flow of the procedure. We got to go ahead to start the power up 2.5 hours before we're going to hit the air at 25,000 miles an hour in this dead spacecraft. So we crawled in there and with our flashlights, because it was dark, dead spacecraft. First thing we noticed was as water covered the instrument panel, so Jack got out a couple of towels, and we wiped the instrument panel off so we could even see the meters. And then thinking about that, the first step in the procedure was to push in the circuit breakers on panels on each side of that vehicle. And Jack said, why don't we I'll give the call, and we'll just push in 6 at a time and stop. And we'll see if we smell insulation burning. And we're worried about electric short. So that's the way we went through getting all our circuit breakers in. And we got through that, and everything was fine. The other thing was I'll have to give the ground credit for the perfection of the procedure, because if you're powering up a vehicle from start, because of the way systems are turned on in what sequence, you will get caution and warning lights that are normal. But of course, if you're doing that kind of a procedure and it wasn't written in that would happen, it would stop you. If you get a caution warning light, you just stop and say, what do I do now? But that procedure was perfect. It had every one of those called out. So we got the vehicle powered up in that short time remaining. Jack got a star alignment even to get it set up for entry. And of course it went perfectly. We had, again, by that one another appendices in that Apollo program report, we tied for the second most accurate splashdown in the program.
One final remark, this is just a remark. You've seen all those pictures in Mission Control, and sometimes when we look stern and concerned and very professional. But let me tell you, it was a hoot. The whole thing, getting to the end, was quite the honor, and what a hoot it was to be a part of it. Thank you.
Applause for Bill Ringwood, Dean Grant, Jerry Griffin, and Fred Hayes. to just do one more thing here. If I could have you four stand over here. And Jerry, if you want to just hold that. We want to give you, if you want, an opportunity to take a picture of the four of our special guests here tonight. Isn't it wonderful to have a camera phone?
Neat, huh?
Fantastic. I'm gonna know. That's one for me.
Wow.
How old are you? I just need this one. Can you let me?
Born in 46?
Wait, John, I have to get
How about one more round of applause for our special guest? I'm going to ask them to take their seats so they can have some dessert. And we want to thank you all for coming tonight, supporting the Cradle. The auction is going to be over in a few minutes at 9:45. So if you haven't been, if there's time, you can still do that. But we want to thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate your support, and we hope to see you at another event. Thanks very much.